All right. Good evening. This is Patrick Dean for Seminar Systems at Patrick Dean Coaching, and I'm glad to be on here with you for Facebook Live because I got really angry the other day, and I started writing about this, and I started doing some research, and I'm going to talk about something I'm calling the age of zero tolerance. And in a time of Christmas and in a time of holidays, that we should be probably operating a little closer to our heart. I have noticed that there's a lot of stuff going on there, and that isn't even to mention the political things that are going on right now and all of this turmoil that's happening. And so I want to dive into that for the short minutes that we have together, and I want to talk about some research. So what we're going to work with here is first we're going to talk about human nature. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience with human nature and some experiments that were done. Then what I'm going to talk about is the thrill of making other people wrong. And that experience. And I know that we have a lot of peace and love in our hearts, and a lot of us have been to trainings and we're open. But, I caught myself in the middle of this the other day, and this is really, I'm speaking to myself around this a lot. What I'm also going to talk about is why we don't, the actual research on why we don't like to admit our mistakes. Which may seem obvious, but there's going to be some very interesting things in here, I think, for you. Another thing is that I'm going to talk about who we are being when we are the most critical. I'm going to talk about some research around that, and then I'm going to talk about when we are operating from judgment, what are the experiences that we are creating for ourselves? What's really going on with that? And I hope at the end of this Facebook Live, you're going to have a real idea about what drives us on both sides, our compassionate side, and also talking about this judgment or intolerant or critical side of ourselves and when that shows up. So let's jump into this. And I think what really got me thinking about this was the other day, I was in town doing some Christmas shopping and having a great time. And there was a bunch of traffic, a bunch of people in town, and I was sitting at a stoplight waiting to move forward. And there's two lanes, and there was a woman in a car right next to me, and there was a bunch of cars behind me because I was the first in line to go across the intersection. And the moment the light turned green, this guy behind this elderly woman just jumped on his horn, and he had a big pickup, and he jumped on his horn almost immediately. And boy, I looked over, and it scared the daylights out. It startled both of us, and many people around, I would imagine. But it just got her all flustered and upset. And then we drove on and went to our various places and stuff. And so I thought, well, this guy's a jerk, and I started to have a bunch of judgment on him and all kinds of stuff. And then I begin to look at myself. Now, I'm not going to be a person that jumps on the horn when the light turns green like that. But I was looking at the little areas in my life where I've got that kind of judgment going, that people aren't doing what I think they should be doing. And I don't know if you relate to this, but I mean, there's a ton of stuff out there that people just get me going, like people that talk too slow or they talk too fast, or people that jump into line or drop their stuff or get in the way or break the flow or whatever's happening out there. I find myself kind of getting frustrated with that. And I think there's an origin for that. And there's a way that maybe we can bring more peace and be more peace in this world, and maybe get off this whole thing about them and us that's going on right now, and all of this stuff around intolerance and judgment. So anyway, first of all, there was an experiment. I'll talk about sleep for a second, and then I'm going to talk about being in a group of people. And sort of there is a paradox that goes on for us, and I'll talk about that. And then we're going to jump into this this basic research about tolerance and judgment. So, first of all, there was some very interesting research that found out that people wake up a certain number of times during a night. That's just part of what we do. And we wake up but go back to sleep for the most part very quickly. So there's a bunch of times, like these micro times that we wake up. And so this research was done, I think it was done in Princeton, and it was measuring the number of times people had these incidents where they woke. They weren't conscious, they didn't know that, and they went back to sleep immediately. And here's what they found out. They found out that people that slept better, which of course has to do with our health and has to do with our relationships and everything, sleeping better, people that slept better felt more secure in their life. So people woke up less times that felt more security in their life. So from our ancient ancestors, I think we learned that sleeping out on the savannah in Africa, we learned that being together and feeling supported meant that we were safer. So there's this natural tendency that we have to want to have people around us and feel supported by actual people in our lives. And so we will go on a search for those people in our lives. Now, some of the people are based, the people that we find are just based in proximity. They're our neighbors, or they're people around us. Sometimes we choose people in our lives because they believe the same things we do. They have the same religion, or one thing that found a very interesting in some research is that people like to be surrounded by people who sort of make the same amount of money as they do. And I know that kind of this whole thing about wanting more abundance and wanting to be rich, one of the things that we all have to overcome in that is the fact that we would leave one strata that we're comfortable with and go on to another strata of people that we aren't so uncomfortable with, or that we're less comfortable with. So that's part of this whole thing about reaching out. Now, we have our relatives in our life, and some of you really love your relatives and maybe not like them as much, but or maybe you do love them and like them. There's a whole kind of range of people around us that way. And then we choose people perhaps because of their political beliefs. We want people around us that kind of agree with us there. And we see people that don't agree with us or don't think the same way, or for whatever differences, we see them as outsiders. And so there's this tremendous judgment that we have about whether we relate to this person or relate to the people in our lives and relate to gathering support. Now, what comes up against that drive to belong is the drive to be an individual, the drive to express our own who we are, the drive to express our own gifts, to express what we have to give in the world, or who we are, our individual personality. So there's a drive for individuality. So we like to be in a group of people, but we also like to show up sort of like the rebel sometimes and have that individual part of ourselves. And so this whole thing about wanting to belong and being very sensitive to the people around us, how they feel about us. And the other part of that is really being the individual, creates a tension. And sometimes that tension shows up and it really gets difficult, especially around holidays, especially around all of the kind of stuff that goes on between people in communication. You know, there's spoken and unspoken messages. There's all kinds of stuff. People often say that our relatives know how to push our buttons the best of anybody. And so we've got all that stuff goes on, and then it shows up in this tension. And what we start to do is we start to get upset or stressed or angry, and that anger oftentimes comes out in relationship to other people. Now, one of the safest ways to express anger is not to the people that are closest to you, but to express anger to a group that we can sort of name and see them as outsiders. And I think that is one of the things, that's an acceptable way to express some of the frustration and other stuff going on inside us, is we start to pick out these people in our life, people that aren't moving fast enough or doing what we want them to do, or they seem to be, they're getting in the way of what we think things should be doing or way things should happen, and all of that. I don't know if you relate to what I'm saying, but we start to just kind of pick that out. So the guy that jumps on the horn and honks the horn right when the light turns green, there's something going on there. And as I said, I related it to myself. So I was looking at what is actually driving that as a deep level. I know that there's this low level of anger that goes on, and so what is that about? So this research that I wanted to share with you comes from a magazine called Market Insider magazine, and it was a research by the Psych Test Institute. And what they did in this research was they gave a test to people about their feeling about themselves, about areas of self-worth and self-value. There was a test there. And then they give a test on tolerance and judgment and critical thinking or criticism and fault finding. And they had a test to determine how critical we were, where we were on that scale. And so those two tests were combined to give us some incredible information. And that's what I'm going to share. So the first thing I want to talk about is what they found out about why we don't like to admit our mistakes. And I mean, I know some of this is common sense, but I really like the idea that this shows up absolutely true in research. So why we don't like to admit mistakes. 66% of people feel that talking about mistakes they've made will make them vulnerable to rejection, and they'll be mocked by other people. That was the research on that. So 66% of people feel at some level that talking about things that didn't work for them or talking about mistakes makes them vulnerable to other people. And so the action that comes from that, not wanting to feel or experience that, is maintaining power. And oftentimes people will mock other people or make fun of other people or bully other people to get the jump on that because they're so afraid of that vulnerability that they start to be critics of other people and mock other people and attack them personally. That's one of the behaviors that comes out of that, from my point of view. The research shows that 64% of people feel degraded when somebody points out an error that they've made, that they really take this personally. So what the driving behavior, from my experience, the driving behavior behind that feeling degraded when somebody points out something is it shuts down any kind of conversation. That people don't want to have those kind of conversations because they don't want to get into it. So what it generally deteriorates to is one of two things. There's a shout down argument that goes on because you pointed out something in me. So I'm going to come up full up anger. I'm going to come up full on in my resistance to that. Or the second thing is that people walk on eggshells, that this is not something you talk about, not something that's brought up, that you just go internal and you're not going to get in any kind of conversation. And of course, if you are, this cuts down on your ability to learn from errors or experiences. So there's a couple more in this area here. 65% didn't like criticism, and they didn't want to operate with anybody. They didn't want to have any experience of criticism, and 58% of people feel totally insulted if you don't believe what their idea, and they feel an experience of rejection. And then this one, 70% of the people hate admitting when they're wrong. I think I fall into that one. Now, the other side of the research, combining the other tests that they took, or whatever the survey they took, they said that people that were more conscious or more aware, like 65% of people felt that criticism really hurt them. But people that had a high level of awareness, according to this one test, 16%, only 16% of those people felt that way. Only 18% of the people that were working on their consciousness or having more awareness felt that bad when their ideas were not taken on or felt degraded. It was way, way different when you're working on yourself. So there's two other parts I want to cover on this, and then we'll talk a little bit about a way to work our way through this one. So it turns out that people who are most critical of other people are the most dependent on other people for their self-worth. I thought that was fascinating. So in other words, 42% of these people that depended on other people also felt inside themselves is that they didn't deserve to be loved or respected. Interesting on the result. 65% of the people said that their whole dream in life was to be admired by other people. 53%. I'm not even going to go through the percentages. Let's just say way over half the people make major decisions from the approval of on the opinions and approval of other people. And a lot of people feel that other people's ideas about what they should do are much better than their own. People that operate from other people's ideas are better than their own and feel that way at a deep level. They get very rebellious and angry. One of the ways that shows up is they don't feel important and they don't feel like they're listened to, and their perception of what other people think is a driving force in their experience. Now, the final part of this research goes this way. Most people who are super judgmental or critical or intolerant or fault-finding or disapproving have an energy, have an experience. And 61% of those people in this study say that they constantly fall short of their expectations of themselves. A high number of people also felt that the only time they feel respected is if they've done something successful or they're successful. 49%, and this is very interesting, and I can relate to this one. If they can't do something perfectly, they don't do it at all. That eliminates risk, eliminates their ability to create. And finally, a large number of people that are very critical and judgmental also have, they feel that they have an intrinsically low value. That's what they see or experience in themselves. So basically, I know that's a lot of numbers and stuff, but basically, as I started to read that and looked at myself, I noticed when I got less tolerant, more judgmental, and more critical, I was operating from a different space within me. And that was that space about other people are responsible for my happiness. Other people need to fill the hole inside of me for my self-worth and what's missing inside of me. Other people need to recognize me, or other people need to praise me or love me or tell me or whatever. And when I'm operating from that place, I happen to be more critical. I don't know if you relate to this at all, but working on our consciousness and working on us knowing ourselves better, and it's letting go of some of the stuff in the past. In the research, in the actual research, shows that we're going to live a much happier, and more peaceful life. And we'll create space for other people instead of operating from this great judgment that comes out when we are coming from a different place. So finally, I wanted to talk about some of the things that we can do. Some of us have been to advanced courses, some of us that have worked together in trainings, and some of us that are coaching or mentoring or working. So what can we do? How can we really work on this all the time? And I got 5 things, and then I'll just start to wrap it up here. But number 1 is I suggest that we stand our ground in what we believe. And if you're a person that believes that we can have a more compassionate and caring world, that we stand our ground, that we're kind of warriors in that spirit, and that you stand your ground in what you believe, and that how other people see you has less of effect on us, on all of us. So stand our ground without blame, shame, or guilt, number 1. Number 2, be compassionate with people and leave out the deservingness part as much as you can. Oh, they deserve it and they don't. Or they're a rebel rouser and they don't deserve it and these people do. And start to broaden our experience of compassion, because you know absolutely without a doubt that everybody has a story. And if we knew that story completely, we would be completely in a place of compassion. And I think that that's a saying that I've heard many times: if you knew all, you would forgive all. And I think that would be a great start for us, is to broaden that experience. That's what my practice is going to be. Number 3, learn to be honest and assertive without the I'm right defensive energy. In other words, I have read about people who got trained in how to be with people in difficult situations, to really connect with people. And if we can leave off this anger part, this anger edge, or this, most people won't say things to other people because they're afraid that this anger is going to come out and they're going to make this person wrong, and then they're going to just escalate this situation. And people that, as you and I know, when we come from more of a grounded place in ourselves, we can have conversations, real conversations with people, not making them wrong, but standing for what's right in ourselves. So that's going to be a great practice. Now, the next one is, there's only 2 more. So the next one is, never walk into a room that you don't have a door to leave. One of my mentors was a very successful businessman. He owned a multi-million-dollar company in Washington, and he spent his life developing this company, and then he wanted to sell it. And so what he did was he found somebody to buy it after going through a bunch of people. And so he found somebody to buy it, and the people were in Japan. So the Japanese company that was going to acquire his company came over. They had their negotiations, and they got everything down, days and days of negotiations with their lawyers and his lawyers and all of that stuff, and really hammered out a great contract. 2 weeks later, he received the contract in the mail from the company, and as he read it, it wasn't anything close to what they'd actually negotiated. And so he said, no, thank you. This is not the contract that I signed, or this is not the contract that I'm going to sign, because this isn't the one we negotiated. And they said to him, no, this was it. This was what we talked about. And he said, no. And they said, well, the president of our company, who happened to be a very famous man in Japan, was coming over. He was going to make a trip over to sign the contract with you. So, that's what's going to happen here. It's a great honor for him to do that and to come over with you. And this guy said, no, thank you. He was really, really disappointed because the numbers are right for him and it was the right time to do that. But he had a door to walk back out of it, and that was integrity. And so he said, no, thanks. And he thought the whole deal was dead. And then 2 weeks later, the actual contract that they originally negotiated came to him. And he got to sign that. And it was that. They were just working him over. They were just working him over. And if he'd have been desperate or hadn't known or felt that power in himself, he would have probably caved in on that. But he did not do that. And I think that there's a lot of things in our life that if we wait and are patient about things, get desperate about nothing, we never know how it's going to turn out. But I think it's a better place to live from. Anyway, that's a long story about, being able to walk away from stuff that doesn't serve you. Okay. Finally, when you're planning your future, find people, find a coach, find a mentor, find somebody that can work with you. And because no one can design the future alone, we all need input and the eyes that from other people, and that feedback and that accountability and all that. So you pay the light bill, you pay the mortgage, you pay you keep up on everything. I would say that you want a budget for someone to help you design and to make 2020 one of the greatest years of your life so far. And so I'll put in a shameless plug here. If you want to work with me, just text me at the number that's on the screen, and I will have a conversation with you. There's no obligation, of course. We can talk about what you might want to do. Or find somebody that you trust and know and become a student and a learner. And that will be one of the greatest things in your life ever. So stand your ground, be compassionate to everyone, be honest and assertive without defensiveness. Never walk into a room that you don't have a door to leave by, and get into your future and design your future. And when you catch yourself in intolerance or judgment or criticism, just take a deep breath, get grounded and centered, and you're going to have an amazing time with people. Be a learner, be a beginner, be a listener. Don't force it, and be out there. And as the old saying, as you've heard a million times, is be the change you want in the world, and shift everything by who you are. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you being on this Facebook Live with me, and we'll do another one soon. Have an amazing holiday, and see the best way that you can serve the people in your life is be yourself and be authentic. Talk to you later.